Hi, I'm Jay Little, and I'd like to introduce you to my game 3 Years of War. 3 Years is a game about resource and action drafting that takes place during the 30 Years' War, one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Over the course of the game, you and your fellow players are going to be vying for these resources, going season by season through 3 consecutive years. Now, it doesn't matter which year of the war that you're looking at, because you and your fellow players are going through the worst of them. So let's go through a turn for a little bit. At the beginning of each year, players are going to levy taxes and resources and be able to draw one of the prime resources in the game, which are influence cards. These influence cards are going to be used during the game to bid on the different actions and resources that are going to be available throughout the year. Then the year goes by season. So you've got a spring, summer, fall, and winter, and between each season to the next is also a small interlude or event phase. So after the spring phase, players can visit the market to use their hard-earned gold. Over the summer, soldiers will fight their battles for them. After the fall, then crops will be harvested, and finally, after the winter, the long, bitter months, you have to make sure that you can support and secure everything that you have in your little fiefdom. So while the 30 Years' War rages around you, you are one of the minor houses on the outskirts of the war and have to fight tooth and nail to protect what is yours. Each player is going to start out with a little tracking card that allows them to track the 4 core resources in the game, which are gold, soldiers, food, and holdings. Over the course of the game, these values are going to be going up and down. So as a player spends gold, for example, he would be moving his marker down on the track. If a player earns food, they would be moving their marker up on the track. It's also really easy to see which resource corresponds most closely with which season. So gold and spring, soldiers and summer, etc. So at the beginning of each season, players will reveal a number of claim cards equal to the number of players in the game. The claims represent what is at stake during this particular season. So as we take a look through the different claim cards, you'll notice that they are each split into 3 sections. The top section lists all of the resources and actions that are positive and beneficial that the player has control over or that they will want to gain over the course of the game. Sometimes the center section will show a locust, and then at the bottom or the red section are the negative resources, things that impact the player directly and often harm them. So as they vie for these cards, these claim cards, they have to balance the positive and negative effects of each card, not only with how they'll impact themselves, but the effect that they'll have on the entire game state and the players around them. Now, these claim cards are fought using season or influence cards. Each season card has an amount of influence shown on it, represented by the season icon that it is best known for. Now, these cards represent the different advisors and people that the players have working for them, offering them advice over the course of the game. For example, in the spring, these are your itinerant priests and wanderers, that merchants who are helping you expand your influence throughout your little fiefdom. In the summer, these might represent your war counselors, generals, and others that help you prepare for the assaults that are going to be taking place over the summer, and so on. So each card is going to have both a season and then 1 or 2 icons for that season. And then they may have some of the resources that have been mentioned. For example, this fall card has 1 food shown on it, which will be important later when players are staking claims. This winter card has a skull on it, which is negative, means one of your soldiers dies. Anyway, players are going to be shuffled these, and when I had mentioned levying taxes, players are going to be dealt a certain number of these each. And then this limited hand of cards is what you'll be doing when you are competing over the different claims. So the start player, randomly determined at the beginning of the game, is going to either play or pass. Those are your only two options when it is your turn around during the influence phase. To play, the player can take any card from their hand, regardless of what icons they have on it, and put it face up in the play area. For example, this would mean that the player is exerting 1 point of influence because there is 1 influence icon on the card. The fact that this is a fall influence icon only matters if we're currently playing in the fall season. Otherwise, it means 1 point of influence. When the next player comes, they have to meet or beat the current influence amount. If you have cards of the same season, for example, if the next player in play order had a 1 spring icon, then because the sage advice of their advisors that season is more important, then 1 spring icon would allow them to then take the lead over the 1 point of influence outside of the season. If we were to continue now, the third player would have to decide, well, am I going to try to stay in and keep competing, or will I drop out? In this case, for argument's sake, we'll say they drop out. That's where these tokens in the middle come in. These represent the draft order that players will use after the influence phase in order to stake their claims. The first player to drop out is always going to take the lowest numbered space remaining. So this player is going to take the 5 piece, meaning that they will be drafting last. Whenever the first player drops out, they also have to take what's called the despair token, or the Raven, which represents that dropping out first is a little bit humiliating and demoralizing to you and your troops. The first player to drop out of every influence phase not only must take that token, they must also take a despair token, one of the resources in the game that's not found on the player card, one of the most challenging resources to contend with. War is horrible and distressing and full of despair, and that's represented by these despair tokens themselves. It's almost impossible to get through the game without it accumulating some of them, and at the end of the game, the despair tokens will be worth a negative amount of points. These points will be subtracted from your score at the end of the game. So again, for this argument's sake, the first player had played 1 influence that was out of season. The second player had stayed and been able to meet or beat that by playing 1 icon that was in season. The third player had dropped out. Let's say the fourth player wants to stay in this as well, but they don't have enough spring icons. Well, if they have more icons of a different season than the current bid, they can stay in. So here, the next player is going to be playing 2 icons out of season, meaning that we're playing in the spring, but he's playing these fall icons. So now the influence total to beat is 2. Now, in order to stay in for this 1 spring, you could have played other combinations. For example, somebody could have played 2 summer icons, even though those 2 appear on separate cards. That would be fine. This player would have been able to stay in as well. Regardless, the stakes have now been raised and the current influence value is 2. So if players want to continue staying in the influence phase, they either need to play 2 more cards in season, for example, or now they would have to play 3 or more icons of the same season that are not spring. Well, eventually people are going to be dropping out and taking the different draft order tokens. Once that's been done, everybody also makes sure that they've collected their secondary rewards. The first player that dropped out had to take the Raven and a despair token, but they also get to draw 2 additional influence cards from the deck. Player 4 gets to draw 1 additional card from the influence deck. The second player in the order stays in long enough that they gain renown, which are the points used to calculate victory at the end of the game. And whoever ends up in first place in this is going to take 2 renown. And renown is going to be accumulated over the course of the entire game. They come in 1 and 5 increments to be able to count up your score. And this is public information over the course of the game. So players are going to be accumulating a lot of renown, And again, I mentioned that despair is subtracted from that. So if I ended the game with 11 renown, and then afterward I had revealed that I had a 3 points of despair over the course of the game, then instead of ending with 11 points, I would have 8. Fortunately, though, there are a number of different resources besides the gold, soldiers, food, and holdings. And those are generally represented by these additional tokens. The scout tokens allow you to take a look at any one piece of hidden information in the game. For example, I could peek ahead to one of the upcoming events. I could take a look at any one of my despair tokens or a token belonging to another player that would otherwise remain hidden. There are writs, which are important notices that have been written by the commanders and leaders launching this 30 Years War. And this is the only piece of hidden information that you're able to keep from the other players. At the end of the game, they'll be revealed and they'll represent a certain number of additional resources that you are able to add to your totals. They can also be revealed during the game if you need them for some reason. For example, if it's the spring and you're visiting the marketplace and you don't have enough gold to participate, but you had 2 gold hidden on some writs, you could reveal them, add them to your total, and then purchase things from the market. There's the despair that I had mentioned before, which are negative points, and that leaves us with perhaps the most powerful resource in the game. And during war, the most powerful resource aren't necessarily your people, but hope, represented by this dove. Hope is valuable because at the end of the game, for each hope symbol that you have, one of your despair tokens will be negated, and you will not have to flip them up and subtract them from your final score. So hope tends to be pretty heavily fought over when it actually comes into play. There's a certain cadence that comes up over the course of the game as well. Things tend to be fairly mild and calm during the spring as players receive more cards. Usually the rewards are greater and the penalties less in the different claims that come up. Summer tends to be a little bit more heated with a lot more resources and actions that immediately affect the other players, such as the assault action that allows you to target another player and kill off some of their soldiers. Fall is when the crops are harvested, and it's important to take a look at your food to see if you have enough food to be able to feed your soldiers, etc. And then in the winter with holdings, do you have enough holdings to be able to keep everybody safe? But one of the actions, lay siege, for example, allows you to destroy another player's holdings. So the game is going to be going spring, marketplace, summer, the field of battle, fall, reaping what was sown, winter, and then the bitter months. After players have gone through one entire sequence of this, the game starts back at the beginning with a brand new spring phase, and you will go through that 3 times, and after the 3rd year of war, players will count up any points that they've accumulated through renown over the course of the game, whether it's by staying in during the influence phase or as a reward on one of the claim cards that they have taken earlier in the game. They might also have renown showing on, for example, a writ card or a writ token that they had gained during the game. You're also going to be able to score points by comparing the number of resources that you have relative to the resources of other players. At the end of the game, you are going to score 1 additional renown for each player that you have more of a particular resource. So let's take this, for example. This player at the end of the game ends up with 8 soldiers. Now, if these other players had 6, 5, and 5 soldiers each, the player with 8 soldiers would score 3 points because they have more than 3 other people in the game. The player with 6 soldiers would score 2 points because they have more than 2 other players in the game. Meanwhile, the players with 5 would get nothing. So players do that comparing gold, soldiers, food, holdings, as well as any influence cards that they have left in their hand. and add all of that to their renown. Once they've added all of their renown and subtracted any penalties for despair, that's their total. Players then compare the amount of renown that they have, and the player with the most renown was able to weather the storm that is war and manage their household best, and they come out the victors over these 3 years of war.